bonsoir. The whole point of having the seminar series was really to get a chance to meet researchers on campus. And tonight we're really lucky to have someone who is at the interface between physics and biology working on campus. I'll leave Tristan to introduce him. But Benoit is also the head of the LabX Who Am I, which is really dedicated to encouraging discourse and research between disciplines. So it's in that spirit that I'm very happy that Benoit launches the seminar series for 2022. Please sign up so that you come back in February, and please make sure you participate in the questions at the end. Merci Benoit. Tristan.
Okay, thank you Jonathan, and thank you all for coming today. So today our guest is Benoit Ladoux. He is a researcher in biophysics and the group leader at the Institut Jacques Monod. First, he obtained a PhD in biophysics at Paris Diderot after studying the interactions between single biomolecules by fluorescence video microscopy. He then continued to work on single molecule biophysics at the Institut Curie. Later, he joined the Laboratoire Matière et Systèmes Complexes and worked as a PI on cell mechanics. In 2008, he participated in the creation of the Mechanobiology Institute in Singapore, where he worked for 2 years, and then he joined the Institut Jacques Monod to lead the cell adhesion and mechanics group, along with René-Marc Meige, a cell biologist. So his research group is now trying to understand how cell adhesion-associated mechanotransduction and mechanosensing regulates cell behavior and tissue mechanics. And today, Benoit Ladoux will talk about the emergence of cell polarity in response to physical signals.
All right. Thank you very much for the very nice and complete introduction. Okay, so thank you very much, Tristan and Jonathan, for the introduction. I'm very happy to talk to you today. So indeed, what I wanted to show you today is mainly two examples of what we did over one of them over probably 15 years. So it will be a summary of a long journey in mechanobiology on single cell migration, and the second one is more like something a bit more recent, but even though something that started in Singapore indeed, as you mentioned, because I was spending a lot of time there, 2 years, and then I was going back and forth during 6 years, like 4 months per year at this Mechanobiology Institute, which is a nice place, by the way, if you're interested in mechanobiology. And they have a PhD program as well, so that you can have a look on the PhD program there. So today I'm going to talk about this idea of cell polarity and basically how you can change cell polarity by changing the environment. And basically in our group we are mostly interested in the interaction of cells, as you were pointing out, the interaction of cells with the environment, and how basically when you change the physical properties of the environment you can trigger various behaviors, including cell migration. So to start, I will give you two examples that will be the two examples I will focus on during the talk, which are this cell movement. And basically the first one is a single cell that is moving over a substrate, and as you can see there is a polarity. Okay, there is a direction of migration, and this polarity is mainly given by the fact that you have a strong lamellipodia on one side, this kind of large protrusion that you have on one side, and the cell is moving from the left to the right in this example over the substrate. Of course, to move, it has to exert some forces on the substrate. Okay, like when you are moving on the floor, then you have to you have to exert some friction to move forward. And this friction here is defined in such a way that it relies on the interaction that these cells are doing with the substrate. You can see that you have all those kind of retraction fibers, for instance, during this single cell migration, these small fibers that you can see at the back of the cell, for instance. And those are like the reminiscent of the adhesion that the cells were making with the substrate before like going through the substrate. Okay. But of course, it's not the only example that you can find in vivo. That's the single cell migration. They are more like usually driven by fibroblast or by the immune cells, for instance, that you may have in the immune system. But it could be also related to the migration could be also related to collective cell migration, meaning that in the second example that you have at the bottom of this slide, you can see that cells can interact with each other. Here you can see that you have cells moving again from the left to the right, and there is a very strong lamellipodia which is formed at the front of this cluster of cells which is moving, and I will come back to this idea. You see that the cell at the front is slightly different from the other cells, okay? Looks bigger, you have a super strong lamellipodia, and it seems that this cell is able to drive the entire cluster of cells at the back. But anyway, you have also this kind of migration. You have also a polarity. Of course, it's a polarity at a larger scale because it's a polarity over multiple cells this time. But those cells can. So one of the questions is what triggers this polarity? Can you change the polarity? Can you guide cell migration by changing, for instance, the physical cues that cells encounter when they are moving like that on a substrate? All right. So this polarity is something that you can find. I mean, the polarity in collective cell migration is something that you can find in many different systems. One of them is this movement that you have here on the left part, which is the migration of a cluster of cells during the development of the zebrafish, where you have the formation of the migration of this cluster of cells along the lateral line of the zebrafish. So you see, you have again this cluster. Here the resolution is not that good, but you have also a tip cells at the front, which is indeed have a particular phenotype, and that lead to this collective cell migration in this open space. Okay, so this is one example in vivo. Of course, you have multiple other examples in vitro, for instance, during this kind of wound closure experiment, model wound, where you have cells which are closing gaps created in this culture of cells, and during this gap creation, you see that cells can move into the gap. They extend again lamellipodia. They have this kind of, you can probably see this strong protrusion that they exert at the edge of this circular shape as they are closing the gap. And the last example that I would like to show you is really reminiscent of the previous one, is this expansion of cells over like free space. You have expansion of these monolayers, and as they expand, indeed, you see that the border is changing a lot. You have a huge change of shape, and that can trigger also the formation of this kind of like finger-like structure, if you want, at the edge here, that will extend and lead to this highly coordinated movement over the free space. Okay, so this is the kind of movement that you can get, and indeed this idea of having movement means that you need some coherence between cells. As I was saying before, you need some interaction with the substrate. To move forward, you need this kind of friction. The friction is mainly driven by the fact that you have interaction with the substrate. So this is a mechanical connection that you can see here, which are where you can see those schematic where you have this kind of adhesion complexes, which are called focal adhesions or fibrillar adhesion, depending on their maturation, for instance. But this is the adhesion that the cells are making with the extracellular matrix. Okay, and through this adhesion, between those adhesions, you may have actin fibers, and those actin fibers are usually contractile, and that's the way those cells are able to exert forces on the substrate, and how they are able to propel in a particular direction by exerting those forces. So this kind of like forces, of course, this is very dynamic. Here you have a still schematic of the system, but this system is moving. So those adhesions, they are always, constantly under like formation and deformation, or assembly and disassembly. And similarly, you have also adhesion at the cell-cell contact for like in the context of collective cell migration, for instance. And those adhesions here, they are usually related through another type of complexes, which are mainly driven by this adherent junction, through these cadherin molecules, which are making some homophilic interaction between two neighboring cells. And those interactions are indeed also triggered by the contractility of the cytoskeleton, the fact that behind those adhesions you have indeed an extracellular and an intracellular part of the cadherin, and the intracellular part is linked to the alpha-catenin, beta-catenin, but also to the actin cytoskeleton, which is contractile. Okay, so you have at least a similar structure, a structure that enables the system to keep its coherency by having this kind of strong forces and strong intercellular forces, but also mechanical connection between adhesion at the cell-substrate interface. All right, and if you look at that on a global scale, what you can do is you can try to measure those forces. Okay, so that this has been a very high, something that has been very well developed in the field of mechanobiology, which has been to measure, to quantify parameters, and in particular, it could be like physical parameters, so it could be velocities, strain rates, but also forces and stresses. So I will come back to this idea of forces and stresses, but what you can see on this map here is the migration of those of a cluster of cells. So here you have like epithelial cells, MDCK cells basically, which are a standard model for in vitro culture. So dog kidney cells that are moving on the substrate. Again, you have a free space here. Those cells are moving in this case from the right to the left. And what you can measure here is the forces exerted on the substrate, because you have beads which are embedded inside the substrate here. Okay, so the substrate is soft. I will come back to this idea, because you need to see the deformation of the substrate. And by measuring the deformation of the substrate, you can measure the forces that the cells are applying. And you can measure different kinds of forces. I will not enter into the detail, but basically, using those kind of technique where you have fluorescent beads embedded into a soft gels. I will show you another example at the end. You can basically measure the deformation of the gel, and from the deformation of the gel that you have underneath, which is located underneath the cell, you can measure the forces exerted by the cells. You can infer the forces exerted by the cell on the substrate. And you can measure different kinds of forces. Here you have the perpendicular forces, the parallel forces exerted by the cells on the substrate. And from those forces, what you can get is the stress. Okay, so what is the stress? The stress basically is the tension, if you want, that you may have inside the system. Okay, the system could be under tension. It's like this, this game that you can play. I will show you the picture that you can play with friends, where you have this kind of like this tight tension that can be exerted on both sides, and that can put the system under tension. So from the forces on the substrate, what you can measure basically is this kind of constraint, this kind of stress exerted on the system. And what you can see here, which is quite interesting, that I will not enter into the equation here, but the stress here, if you want, is the sum of the forces which are exerted on the substrate. So from the forces exerted on the substrate, you can integrate those forces, and you can measure the stress which is accumulating inside the monolayer. And you could have imagined that different mechanical stresses might be at play in the system. You can easily imagine that you may have like forces which are coming from proliferation, for instance. And a very simple idea, if you think of forces coming from proliferation, is the idea that you will build up an internal pressure that will push on the system to expand the system outside. Okay, but you can also think that those forces can come from active behavior of the cell. I'm not saying that division is not active, it's active indeed, but other active behavior that can be driven by this migration that I was showing you before. So the fact that cells can grab the substrate, pull on the substrate, and by pulling on the substrate can lead to traction forces that will take the other cells behind in the same direction. And what you can see here by measuring those, the take-home message here is that by measuring those traces, you can have an idea of the mechanical state of the tissue, which is not super easy to do in vivo. That's why I think in vitro system may be interesting in that case. Here you can measure the stress, and what you can see, you can measure the stress as a function of the distance. So the distance from the edge, and you can measure the stress internally. So when you measure the stress, what you realize is that the stress is increasing as a function of the distance, which is not very obvious. I mean, you could have imagined, again, different scenario, like a building up of pressure, cells which are pushing, but the fact that the stress is increasing here from the edge to the center of the monolayer, it means that basically that the system is under tension, and as you move from the zero here, which is at the edge, toward the center, then the stress is building up. Okay, so you build up a stress, which means that more and more as you enter into the monolayer, you build up this stress, and you have more and more tension, basically. Okay, the stress is increasing. What you can see also is that the density, of course, is increasing as you move from the edge to the center of the monolayer, but that's another story. And I don't know if I saw that Nicolas Borghi was in the audience, so I would say that this is an old experiment by Xavi Trepa, done by the group of Xavi Trepa, but Nicolas Borghi at the Institut Jacques Monod did a similar experiment using Fred sensor, and he showed basically also that the Fred signal, which is an indication of the tension at the junction, was indeed showing exactly the same trend, meaning that you have a higher tension inside the system than in the bulk, if you want, of the monolayer as you move from the edge to the bulk. Okay, so basically the idea that as the system is moving, as you have this huge migration, you have a system which is under tension, which is indeed a little bit reminiscent. So this is something that you have on this picture here, okay? You have forces on one side, forces on the other side, and you build up tension basically from one side to the other, which is a very simplistic view of seeing a multicellular system, but which is very reminiscent of what you can get for a single cell, because for a single cell, again, the system basically is a simple picture, a simple physical picture, if you want, of a single cell in terms of traction forces, is the fact that you may have, you form these complex, these adhesion complexes on one side, on the other, and that you may have forces which are transmitted through in that case, a stress fiber, which is an actin stress fiber, which is contractile, and that pull between these two adhesions. So you have like inward forces, which are exerted in that case at the single cell level. But at the end of the day, what you observe is that the global picture looks the same as you move from single cell towards something which is more multicellular. All right, I will not take too much time on the introduction, but I think it's important for you to understand I mean, a little bit, to have a little bit flavor of the mechanical behavior of those epithelial cells. And as a consequence of that, if you observe cells on different substrate with different rigidity, for instance, which is the case here, so you have a gradient of rigidity, okay, you move from a soft surface on the left and you have a stiff surface on the right, okay? If you have an homogeneous gel, so what you do here, the experiment is very simple. You have a band of cells, then you have, at first you have an obstacle that prevents the cells to migrate, you remove the obstacle, and so the cells can expand on both sides. If the substrate is homogeneous, is uniform, then you have a symmetrical expansion, as you can see. Okay, here they are like symmetrically expand. I mean, you have small changes, tiny changes at the edge, but basically you have the similar velocity on the left and on the right. But if you change the rigidity, what you observe here is that you have a change in the migration. Okay, you can observe that cells on the right, they are moving faster than the cells on the left. Okay, meaning that you can. The idea of this paper published in Science like 5 years ago was clearly to say that by changing the rigidity, you can change the collective migration, the collective polarity, if you want. Okay, so you can basically extend cells faster on the right and on the left. That can be very important if you think of any durotactic gradient, for instance, in vivo. And this has been further shown by the group of Roberto Mayor in vivo, showing that neural crest cells during development, they can indeed follow a gradient of rigidity in vivo. So it's not only an experience of physicists, if you want, but that's really something that can have an impact on development. All right, so you have this global behavior, meaning that cells will interact with each other, and what I was saying here is that finally you have a coordination over a large scale, and this coordination can even lead to this very simple picture saying that this kind of like multicellular system can indeed behave as a single cell. Okay, and I will show you the example of the single cell in this context, in the context of durotaxis, and you will see that you have a similar behavior. So you have large-scale coordination. Even though in some experiments you can observe that if you look at a very local scale, if you look for instance in the migration of cells over a substrate, if you look at the local scale, what you can observe is the fact that you can form those finger-like structures that I was mentioning before. And even at the tip of those fingers, you have like special cells which are called leader cells, and that can indeed potentially lead to the migration or the orientation of cells behind. Okay, you see that this structure is very particular. Now I'm zooming at the interface between the free space and the bulk, more locally if you want than before. And what you can observe is that you have this kind of structure here, which I will call finger-like structure, okay, which is this kind of multicellular structure. And if you measure the force within this structure, what you observe is that you can measure the force within the finger. And if you measure the force within the finger, which is represented here, this is a force as a function, again, of the distance from the tip, from the extremity to the bulk of the monolayer. If you measure that, what you observe is that you have positive forces at the front, but you have negative forces at the back, meaning that you have like a force dipole. Okay, so what you have here, which is represented on this schematic, is the fact that you have opposite forces over this entire finger. The fact that you have opposite forces means that you may have a force dipole. Okay, you have like forces which are counteracting each other, so you have like a force dipole, and this could lead to the idea that you may have indeed a coordinated entity, at least mechanically, that can be independent of the rest, because you may have forces which are exerted here on one side, forces exerted here on the other side. So it looks like this, basically this kind of like finger-like protrusion is almost not connected to the rest of the monolayer mechanically, even though biologically it is connected, because you still have indeed cell-cell junction at the back. Here you cannot clearly see that this cell is disconnected from the other, for instance. So even though you have forces which are opposite here and here, you have forces which are opposite here and here, the rest indeed is connected to the rest of the monolayer, but you can have local mechanical rearrangement that lead to the formation of protrusion. So the idea here is just to tell you that you may have a large-scale coordination. So there is, on one side, you have a large-scale coordination, but on the other side, there is also some particular properties of those monolayers, I see this kind of collective cell migration, that leads to a polarity, because you have indeed a polarized cluster of cells, if you want, that leads to polarity, and this polarized cluster looks almost like an independent mechanical entity. To go further into that direction, what people observe also is that during collective cell migration, what you may have is what they call cryptic lamellipodia. So not only of course at the front of the migration of a collective layers, you have cells which are extending lamellipodia, this kind of protrusion that leads to this collective cell migration, but also in the bulk. They observe that some of the cells can, this kind of yellow signal that you can see here, some of the cells can extend this cryptic lamellipodia underneath the other cells. Meaning that potentially you may have also cells inside the monolayer that may drive some particular dynamics that could lead to the reorganization of the monolayer inside. So you may have indeed single cell behavior inside the monolayer, and in that case, again, it's quite antagonist with this idea of having like a fully coordinated movement, like multicellular system will behave only like a single cell. So there is a little bit this controversy in the field, and I will come back to this idea between the fact that you may have like independent cells which are independent of each other that lead to this collective cell migration, because you may have interaction, physical interaction, but without so many connections between the cells that will lead to a global movement, or the fact that it's very important to have this cohesiveness, and the fact that indeed what is really driven this coordinated movement is the fact that you have like a large-scale mechanical signal that can propagate over multiple cells in the system. All right. And indeed, you have, I mean, just to give you example and a little bit of the zoology of the system, but you have multiple systems. And here I just want to emphasize the fact that in vivo, indeed, you may have also systems where cells are in a closed environment and not only moving in an open space, like the example I was showing you before. And the example I really like very much is the one from the Drosophila chamber. So here you have the follicle cells in green, which are moving along the egg chamber, okay, and you can see that those follicle cells, they are rotating along the egg chamber of the Drosophila and completely collectively. So you have a full collective rotation of those follicle cells all over the chamber, and there are some ideas that potentially also this kind of coordinated movement in the transverse direction of this ellipsoid, if you want, could also lead to the shaping of the system. All right, and in this Drosophila, importantly, the extracellular matrix also is important, because when you have the collective rotation of the epithelial cells in the egg chamber, so again those follicle cells which are rotating, indeed the extracellular matrix is completely reorganized, and you have like collagen fibers, as you can see here, which are organized in the direction of migration. So here you have the actin fiber, the collagen fiber, and you can see that both are colocalized after a while. At a certain stage of development, those cells are completely polarized, they are moving in the same direction, and by this movement they also reorganize the extracellular matrix. So there is a change, so there is a feedback between the extracellular matrix and how cells can move, and this feedback can lead to indeed either a change of the cellular properties, but also a change of the external environment, because they can also reshape the environment. And I hope that you can also appreciate that those cells, they do not only have stress fiber or like contractile fibers aligned along the direction of this collagen fiber, but you also have polarity. Okay, as you can see here, you have this VASP which shows the actin polymerization, which is localized really at the front of the cells as the cells are moving along the egg chamber. So each cell is polarized in the same direction in the system. So this idea of polarity is important. Okay, so the open question, and I'd like to I mean, I will of course focus a little bit now on what we are doing in the group, but the idea is really to understand how this polarity can emerge first at the single cell level. Do we have some tools to probe the emergence of polarity? And second, how can we explain in this kind of different regime that you may have like collective cell migration with polarity, whole cells moving in the same direction? Is it like a fully coordinated movement? Do you have like single cell which are moving inside inside the collective, and how you can lead to a coordinated movement? That's the two questions I would like to answer. And also give you a little bit of idea of what kind of tools we can use as a physicist to probe these kind of ideas. Okay, so the first one is to the single cell movement and single cell response, and I will just briefly introduce you to this concept of if you don't know, the fact that the physical properties of the extracellular matrix can of course change a lot in vivo. As you can see here, and a way of characterizing the extracellular matrix is to measure the elastic modulus of the matrix. And as you can see, you have a lot of variation. It can move from something which is a few hundreds Pascal to something that can be, of course, super stiff, as for the bones, for instance, which is around like a few gigapascal. So you see that you have large orders of magnitudes of this elastic modulus that can vary inside your body. And indeed, different cells will evolve in these different matrices. So you may not expect to have exactly the same type of behavior, for instance, if you evolve in a super soft matrix, which is easily deformable, or in a matrix which is hardly deformable. And that's exactly what people have done. They have tried to check the properties and the cellular response to the matrix rigidity. And if you look at that, I will give you briefly two examples. Back to this collective durotaxis I was showing before. Now it's a single durotaxis, and you can see that here you have an example of a single cells coming from a soft to a stiff substrate. So you can see that it can cross easily the boundary from the soft to the stiff. But on the opposite, if you look at these cells coming from the stiff substrate and arriving at the boundary between the stiff and the soft, then it can move along the boundary and then go back, change its polarity a little bit, and go but at least stay on the stiff part of the substrate. So people call that durotaxis, meaning that you can guide the migration of cells by changing the rigidity of the substrate. And again, the most probably the most well-known example is this idea of mesenchymal stem cell done by the group of Dennis Discher, where they show that when the differentiation program can also be modulated by the rigidity of the substrate if you use these mesenchymal stem cells that can differentiate into which are pluripotent stem cells. And if you change only the elastic properties of the substrate, then you can trigger different programs of differentiation, neurons on soft surfaces, myoblasts on intermediate stiffness, and precalcifying and osteoblast on a stiffer substrate. So meaning that the rigidity is very important to determine the cell migration, cell polarity, but also to determine potentially the cell fate. And so we try to understand this question, and the way we tackled this question was to use a particular system, which is this micropillar systems that we developed a long time ago. And on those systems, what you do is that you culture cells on these microneedles, and by culturing cells on these microneedles, you can measure the force that the cells can exert on the substrate. Okay, so you cannot only measure the force, you can also change the rigidity by changing the length of the pillar. Okay, if you make them very long, then they will be softer. If you make them short, they will be stiffer. And by measuring the deflection of the pillar, you can measure the force. So that's exactly what we did. You can measure the force, and as you can see, if you change the rigidity of the substrate, so having a soft versus a stiff substrate, you have a very different behavior, or at least a very different phenotype of the cell in terms of actin distribution. Here you can see that you have strong actin fiber which are formed and basically which are parallel to each other in one direction with higher forces. You can see that the magnitude of the forces represented by these yellow rows are larger on stiff than on soft, so you exert at least those cells exert larger forces on the stiff substrate than on the soft surface, but also the actin organization, I will insist on that point, is very different. Okay, so this you can characterize the force in terms of magnitude. And when you do that over a large number of cells, what you observe in these fibroblastic cells is indeed that on soft, you have this kind of circumferential organization versus something which is a lot more polarized on a stiff surface. And in physics, this kind of behavior, this is the actin which is staying here, okay, the actin stress fiber, the F-actin. This kind of behavior shows is a kind of phase transition. So you may have a phase transition from a system which is almost isotropic, in a sense that you don't have any preferential direction, to a system where all actin fibers are aligned in the same direction. And as they align in the same direction, you can imagine that indeed you can apply larger forces in this particular direction, because all the molecular motors can pull in the same direction in that case. So you have indeed a transition as you move from soft to stiff, to a system which is not fully polarized, to a system which is completely polarized. And when I'm talking about polarity, in that case, it's really the polarity or the polarization, if you want, of the actin cytoskeleton. So I will skip that maybe. And so we try to understand that in terms of properties. And what we thought about is to change the cross-linker of the actin cytoskeleton. So we know that you have different cross-linker in the actin cytoskeleton of the cell. You have active cross-linker, if you want, like myosin, which are represented in red here. But you may have also cross-linker which are which are of course these molecular motors, which are linked to the fact that you have transient interaction between the actin and the myosin through the ATP hydrolysis. And you have other type of link where the duration of those links are higher than what you can get from the myosin, which I call passive crosslinker, if you want, such as alpha-actinine, filamine, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you have multiple other crosslinkers. And so we try to look at this question and see indeed if there is a way to regulate the mechanics of that. And this was a work done by Brian Doss at the MBI, indeed, at this Mechanobiology Institute that I was mentioning before. And what we observe is that, so here you have the distribution of the on soft and stiff surfaces, you have the distribution of the alpha-actinine, so this passive crosslinker. You have the distribution of the myosin, and you see that indeed on stiff you have like this strong stress fiber followed by the myosin 2A, which is along those fibers. And on soft surface, you see that, for instance, you have more this kind of circumferential fibers here, and the alpha-actinine is more located at the site of focal adhesions, whereas on stiff substrate, the alpha-actinine is all along the stress fiber again. So there is a change of localization of this alpha-actinine on the soft versus on the stiff. All right, but then surprisingly, when we treat cells with blebistatin, which is an inhibitor of the myosin 2, what we observe is that we can completely change the phenotype on soft surfaces. So if you change, if you treat cells with a low dose of blebistatin, of course, if you treat cells with a high dose of blebistatin, then you indeed you end up with a system which is not really contractile because you kill all the molecular motors. But if you have a system where you have a low amount of blebistatin which is in the solution, what you can observe is that on soft surface you can trigger polarity. Okay, which was not the case before, meaning that on soft surfaces you can have cells which are able to polarize themselves with this kind of large-scale organization of the cytoskeleton, which is not the case when you have either no blebistatin or you see a very low dose of blebistatin where you still end up with the formation of this kind of circumferential fiber, but no net preferential direction of polarity. Of course, on stiff, you still have this kind of preferential direction, high polarization of cells, as it is the case for the 5 macromolar, and you are losing the polarity if you increase the concentration of blebistatin, of course. Similarly, when you do this kind of treatment with in this time this passive crosslinker, so if you increase, so from left to right, you increase the crosslinking of alpha-actinine. So here you have a SI of the alpha-actinine 1 and 4, so you have less alpha-actinine. This one is only because you have different isoform of the alpha-actinine. Here you have the alpha-actinine 4. This is the control, and this is the overexpression of the alpha-actinine. So what you can see here, again, surprisingly, is the fact that cells can even when they are treated, when you have less passive crosslinker, so less alpha-actinine, you can see the cell can polarize faster, if you want, as a function of the stiffness. So they are already polarized on soft surfaces, which is not the case for the control case again. Okay, and you have again on the stiff, you have a strong polarity of the cell, which means that basically you have some kind of adaptation. The idea that I want to pursue is this idea that you have some kind of adaptation of the cytoskeleton to the rigidity, in response to the rigidity of the substrate. Okay, meaning that you have a change of the internal properties of the cytoskeleton, its rheology basically, when you move to soft and stiff substrate, and you can trigger this polarization or the organization of the cytoskeleton by either playing on the passive or the active crosslinker. Maybe I will skip that. And so the main idea of that is the fact that now you can put all the curve on a single one. So what I'm showing you here is the pillar stiffness, if you want, but divided by the cell stiffness as a function of this nematic order, which is basically the organization of the cytoskeleton. So if all the fibers are pointing in one direction, this order will be 1, okay? But if the fibers are completely disorganized, this order will be 0. So you move from 0 to 1 by basically aligning the actin stress fiber. And what we observe here is that if you look at this curve, a way of putting all the points on the same curve is really to renormalize the curve by the pillar stiffness versus the cell stiffness. And what you observe here is the fact is that you have all points now. You can you have this knockdown of alpha-actinin, for instance, actinin 1 and the alpha-actinin 4. You have well, this is a special case, the overexpression of the alpha-actinin, because the stiffness of the cell is probably too high to get a clear response on this curve here. But you have the control in black. And what you can potentially say from those data is the fact that the important parameter is really how the cells will adapt to the external environment and the rigidity of the substrate. And that's why the important parameter here is the ratio between the pillar stiffness, so the substrate stiffness, if you want, and the cell stiffness. Basically, if you have a substrate which is too stiff, then the cells will not be able to exert strong forces. But if you reduce the cell stiffness, then you will end up with a system which is, as you've got for the blebistatin, you can polarize cells on softer substrate when you have softer cell, basically. Okay, that's exactly what the system is telling you here. When you have, I will just come back to that very quickly, sorry. When you have, for the blebistatin, when you have a soft cells, because you treat cells with blebistatin, the cell is softer, okay, because you have less cross-linker, that's the general idea. Then you can polarize, because you can polarize on soft, because the important point is really the ratio between the substrate and the cell stiffness. If the cell stiffness is able to adapt to the underlying stiffness of the substrate, then you're okay, and then the system can polarize. If indeed the cell stiffness is too soft for like that for the substrate stiffness, then it will not be able to polarize, and that will be and if indeed the system is stiff but the cell is stiff, then the cell is able to polarize, as you can see on this example. So the take-home message is really that you can change polarity. And change and that the important parameter is really how the cells can adapt to its environment, and that's really related to this idea of cell differentiation or cell fate that I was showing you before. The fact that indeed the forces and or the mechanobiology of the cell itself can trigger different behavior, but it should also adapt its behavior to the environment or the mechanical properties of the environment. All right, so this was, I think I still have 5-10 minutes because we started a little bit, I will be quick on the last part. I just want to show you another example of polarity. So what I did so far is to show you how you can transit from this isotropic system to a system which is a bit more aligned in terms of actin cytoskeleton. But you can imagine how this could trigger coordinated movement of cells, for instance, in the case of a collective movement. So what we did is to plate cells on micropattern. So here you have a polymer brush that prevents cells to adhere, and they only adhere on this patch of fibronectin that you have in the center. And what you observe is that spontaneously those cells are able to coordinate, and they are rotating over the system. So we try to understand that. We try to understand what can trigger this rotation. Is it the fact that all cells can suddenly polarize in a particular direction and lead to this rotation? So to do that, we use a very simple system, which is this ring of fibronectin. So here you have a ring made of fibronectin. Again, you have a polymer brush that prevents the cells to adhere. And what you can observe is that as soon as the system is confluent, and so as soon as you have cells all over the place on the ring, then they start to rotate in a given direction. It could be clockwise or anti-clockwise, but they start to rotate in a given direction. So what initiates the rotation and what can trigger the rotation? So that's something that you can see here. So this is now a paper which is published in Nature Physics, if you are interested. And what we observe is that indeed in many different systems, independent of the geometry, we have this kind of global rotation and global coordination of the cells. Okay, so it does not depend on the geometry. It does not depend on the width of the ring that you have here. You see that those cells, indeed, they have a bit more difficulty, but they can still rotate in one direction. Okay, so we try to understand the emergence of this rotation and how those cells can sustain the rotation. So to do that, this is a clear example here. You see that they start to move a little bit, they touch each other, and when they form the last contact, boom, then they start to rotate, and they start to rotate all together. So we try to quantify this mechanism in terms of, again, this idea of emergence of polarity, but this time in a collective system. And what we found, indeed, was the fact that if you look at the polarity signal, which is labeled here by this active form of RAC and CDC42, shown in green here on this example, what you can see when the cells are forming the last contact, you have one cell that keeps the polarity in the same direction, but the other one will repolarize in the opposite direction. Okay, so this RAC here is clearly showing that you have like more actin, more protrusion, more lamellipodia. It's usually a good way to label the lamellipodia and the branch, the activity of the branch actin at the front of the cell that you can see on this one, and then it can repolarize in the opposite direction. So basically it means that you have two cells coming together, then they move, they form a contact, and as soon as they form a contact, one of the cells will repolarize in the opposite direction, and boom, all the cells will repolarize, and they will rotate in this direction. So this is a little bit what this kind of picture. The green cells are moving toward the yellow one, and potentially they extend lamellipodia underneath the yellow one, and the yellow one will repolarize and move in the opposite direction. As you can see on this movie here, the one at the back, you see that they can extend a lamellipodia underneath, and as they extend the lamellipodia underneath the other cells, they can move together. And this could be reminiscent of indeed a long, very old experiment done by Abercrombie in the 60s, where he showed that if you have two fibroblasts coming into contact, those one is extending a lamellipodia, and you see as soon as they touch each other, then they retract, and this one is repolarizing in the opposite direction. So he called that CIL, contact inhibition of locomotion, meaning that when two cells with like loose contact, they start to interact with each other, then they can repolarize in opposite direction and then move away from each other. So this is a very important component to understand how cells can move collectively, the fact that they can have this kind of CIL behavior. What we found in our case was the fact that indeed if you perturb the cell-cell junction, then the cells are not rotating. So if you don't have strong cell-cell junction, they are not able to rotate, basically. Okay. And I will just show you this last series of experiments, and then I will finish here. And what we did is to measure the traction force. So I was showing you before the traction force. So the cells are rotating, and as they are rotating, you can measure the force. So that's something that you can see on the left. You can see that all the beads on the substrate, they are moving. And by measuring the displacement of those beads, you can infer the traction forces exerted by the cell on the substrate, okay, as they are rotating on the substrate. And if you do so, interestingly, what you observe is that you have, so this is the kymograph of forces as a function of time, okay. And what you can observe here, so you have those lines, the slope follows the cell movement, basically, but even though it's a traction force, which are represented here. And what you can observe is that you have blue and red lines. The blue ones corresponds to negative forces, and the red ones correspond to positive forces. And you have the alternative stripes of red and blue, okay, all over the space here. And basically, the size of the alternative stripe between the blue and red correspond exactly to the cell size, to the single cell size, meaning that you have opposite forces at the single cell size, and so you have the formation of dipoles of forces at the single cell level. So the emergence of single cell behavior, if you want, in a coordinated movement, in a collective behavior, which is completely different from the picture I was trying to give you at the very beginning, where you have this kind of long-range propagation of forces. In that case, you have only single cell units that can indeed behave independently of each other to lead to this kind of coordination. And as a further proof of this individual polarized cells is the fact that if you look at this RAC signal again, you can clearly see that each cell is polarized in the direction of motion. Okay, you have a gradient of RAC from the front to the back as those cells are extending these cryptic lamellipodia I was mentioning before that you can see on this picture here. They extend these cryptic lamellipodia and each cell is polarized in the direction of rotation. So you form basically something which is not a large-scale coordination, but instead you have local dipoles and each single cell acts as a local dipole and can be independent of each other. Okay, I will not give you all the details of that. The only thing that I want to, well, we did some optogenetics as well to modify the rotation. The last example that I really want to show you is the fact that you can change the cell-cell junction. So here what we did is we know that this E-cadherin junction, they are calcium dependent. So we change calcium in the media. And basically this movie here show you that we start at low calcium, so with no cell-cell junction, but they are at confluency. Okay, so those cells are not rotating, even though they are fully covering the substrate. And then we will move to normal media. So we move to normal media, so they form junction. Okay, they are able to form cell-cell junction. Now they are able to rotate. And we move back to low calcium media and they continue to rotate. Meaning that the emergence of this movement, the cell-cell junction, they are required for the initiation of the movement, but not really to sustain the movement over time. Okay, so there could be, I mean, something that we don't know, but that could be some kind of memory of the polarity, if you want, that will lead to, that will sustain at least for a while, that will sustain the rotation or the coordinated movement of the cell. Once they are polarized in a given direction as a single cell, they keep the polarity and they keep rotating in the same direction, even though even if you disrupt the cell-cell junction, they keep this kind of rotation. So the cell-cell junction are very important. The fact that you have some cohesiveness, it's very important to initiate the process, but not really to maintain this kind of coordinated movement. Okay, and that was quantified again by this parameter here, where you show that you have no coordination at the beginning. This parameter is a coordination parameter, which is 0 almost at the beginning, which is increasing as you add calcium, because you start to form the junction. You move almost to 1, and then as you remove calcium, you keep the same parameter, meaning that those cells they keep rotating in this direction. All right, well, this was another proof of that. Of course, we keep trying to develop models with that. I did not enter into the models for the first part, but we developed a model to understand this rigidity sensing response. And here just to show you the tools, but we'll also develop some models. I will not enter into the details of that. We can discuss about it if you're interested. To show how the polarity can emerge in a very simple systems where you have indeed forces, different kind of forces that can be applied to a single cell that can polarize or not. So you see that you have one cell which is polarized here, one cell which is not. And as they form the contact, you can put some rules that will change the polarity of the blue cells, for instance, when it's in contact with the orange one, and so on and so forth. But you can see that at the end of the day, you can reproduce the experimental result a little bit, where you have all those cells which are polarized in a given direction and leading to this coordinated rotation. This is a work that was done with a collaboration with Alexandre Kabla and Victoire Cachou. All right, I gave you these two examples. I hope I was not too long. I just want to thank people from the Mechanobiology Institute for the first part, especially Mukut Gupta and Brian Doss and Pan Meng for all the rigidity response, and for the second part, Shri and Jane, who did an amazing work. Is now at the Pasteur Institute as a postdoc. We did an amazing work on this coordinated rotation, and of course my close collaborator at the Institut Jacques Monod, René-Marc Mege, Delphine Delacour, Simon de Becco, and other people from the lab. Those work has been done, I was saying that, in very strong collaboration with theoreticians, especially people from the Cambridge, Alexandre Kabla, Raphaël Voiturier from the Institut Laboratory Jean Perrin, from the Material System Complex Laboratory Andrew Callan-Jones, and the ESPCI Philippe Marc. And with that, I would like to thank you. I'm sorry because it was a bit long maybe, but we can rediscuss about that either now or later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lado, for this nice talk. So Jonathan has a question. So he asks, in your rotating cells, what determines which of the cells will change direction polarity when they meet?
Well, that's a good question. If I knew that, what determined? We looked at many parameters, so there are many and known. So it's difficult to know if one of them is better than the other. What we even though the system, I mean, as you know, it's the system has no inertia because we are, I mean, because of the speed and so on. But even though the system has no inertia, what we found is that usually when you look at, what I was saying basically that well, maybe I will stop sharing the screen because I think better to see you. Where is it? I made a mistake. No, I'm back. Okay, so when they meet, so they start to collide. Okay, they meet and then they rotate in one direction. And what we found is that it was usually the winner train was the one which were accumulating more cells polarized in a given direction. So like you can imagine, if you have more cells polarized in a given direction, it will be easier to repolarize a small number of cells than repolarizing a huge number of cells which are all polarized in this direction. So that was one parameter which is important. And something that we found which was interesting as well is the fact that what we realized is that when they meet, basically one cell is able to extend the lamellipodia underneath the other one like that. And basically we think that the fact that there might be a change in the angle, which is random, basically, when they arrive. I mean, they are not exactly polarized in the same way, so they don't have exactly the same shape. And what we found is that the cells which were like extending a stronger lamellipodia usually was winning over the other one. And what we think is the fact that, and that could be related to this idea developed by Mathieu Piel, other people, showing that when you put cells on confinement, when you confine cells, usually you can trigger polarity. So there are very nice movies where you can plate cells on substrate, for instance, which are completely non-adherent. And when they press on the cell on those substrate, when they confine them, then boom, they trigger polarity and those cells are moving very fast. So what we think is that by in this example, the lamellipodium can go underneath these cells, and the fact that you confine the lamellipodium underneath the other cells, I'm not sure I'm super clear, can indeed maintain the lamellipodia and even trigger a higher lamellipodia. So we did this experiment with like a physical obstacle. We put a physical obstacle with a very tiny space, and we observed that when the cells was entering the space, then boom, it could extend a super strong lamellipodia suddenly. So potentially the confinement can be super important to trigger suddenly the polarity. So this that's symmetry breaking processes, which is difficult to explain as any symmetry breaking processes, but that could be one explanation. The fact that you have fluctuation when they arrive and when they meet each other, one cell can win over the other because the local cell shape is different.
Okay, thank you. So there is another question from Isolt, who is asking, do you think your work can be used in the next years to create new fabrics with migration of cells, like stem cell, for example?
New what?
New fabrics.
New fabrics. What does it mean, new fabrics? Organs. This I don't know. What I'm not sure. What we realize is that if you I don't know if I will answer your question directly, but what we realize is that when you use this kind of micro pattern, and when you plate cells on those patterns, they deposit some matrix, or they indeed remodel completely also even on the pattern, they remodel the extracellular matrix. And it turned out that could be interesting because the fact that they remodel the matrix, it changes the behavior of the cell. So you can easily imagine that if you want to culture like organoids, or if you want to culture other cells on that could be a way to potentially change the matrix, potentially change the organization. If your question is more, can it be used to pattern organoids or to pattern stem cells and to see if stem cells can react to geometry, to react to topography and so on and so forth, this has been done. Not in all systems, but indeed, it clearly you can see that if you change the geometry, then you can potentially favor particular behavior like the formation of crypt, for instance, in intestinal organoids, or the formation of other patterns. So indeed, like micro-patterning can be used to for like organ-on-chips. And there is a very recent paper published in Science, like this week, by the group of Matthias Lütolf, showing that intestinal organoids can be shaped by changing the geometry of the extracellular matrix by using some micro-patterning. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how I understood the question.
Okay, thank you. So Jonathan has another question. He's asking, what do we know about differences in rigidity in vivo and how this impacts cell fate, polarity, and movements?
Okay, so that's now I'm glad to have this. Before I was a bit, I had not so much to say to this question for a long time, but now so that's why I think overall I'm just making a digression quickly, but I think that could be, for me, it's a way to think that in vitro experiment could be very important, because it's not only that you find something in vivo and then you want to reproduce it in vitro because it's nice to have, like, you can measure forces and you can do exactly the same, but indeed that will be always better in vivo. I think the very important, a good point raised by your question is the fact that in vitro experiment, it can also trigger, you can also change the way you see the experiment that you are doing in vivo. And indeed, all this kind of rigidity sensing is something that that exists for like 20 years now from biophysicists. And the example I was showing you of this durotaxis is something that was published in 2000. And the experiment, there are now 2 papers published in vivo systems, in neurons, and this neural crest cell migration, which was published in Nature, I think 2 years ago. The first one was in Nature Neuroscience, something like that, where they clearly show that they map the stiffness in vivo by using AFM, so they can look at the stiffness of the environment, and by looking at the stiffness of the environment, they can clearly see that neurons, they were moving toward like gradients of rigidity in vivo. And so that's one example for single cell. And for this neural crest, they show that collective cell migration also in vivo can be triggered by the fact that this neural crest, they move along like corridors, and that's along those corridors you can have also gradient of rigidity, and that this gradient of rigidity can lead to different patterns of the neural crest cells. So that's so one publication is by Christian Franze, if you are interested, and the other one by the group of Roberto Mayor. They are both in Cambridge, Oxford, UK, and indeed. So now there are some proof that this rigidity is very important. Now in both experiments, the amplitude, the magnitude of the rigidity is a lot lower than what I was presenting here. It's I think it's 100 Pascal or something. In neurons, it's a very, very soft environment. So it's a lot low. The rigidity are a lot lower than what I was presenting here in vitro. But you can do that in vitro. It's a bit difficult in vitro to culture cells on these very, very soft systems. But
okay, thank you. I also had a question. I was wondering to what extent, if it's possible to study, to measure cell-generated forces in vivo.
Sorry, the question is it's your question or the question?
Yes, it's my question. I was wondering.
Okay, so can you repeat it? What distance?
To what extent, sorry, if it's possible to measure, to study cell-generated forces in vivo.
Okay, I got it. I saw the Isel, she was saying, haha, thank you. So maybe I answer the question. All right. So yes. So that was my point during the talk. The fact that indeed it's a lot easier to use in vitro system to measure forces. As you can see, you can plate cells on something which is deformable, and then you have access to the force. So that's very easy. But putting polyacrylamide gels inside in vivo system, it's another story. So what people are doing is to so there are tools now that have been developed. One of them is they use optical tweezer. So they use beads so those beads are incorporated inside cells, and they are able to using a laser trap. They are able to take the beads and move it locally, so you can measure local forces like that. So this work has been implemented by Pierre-François Laine in Marseille. And there are other people who develop some basically some soft droplets that you can embed into the tissue, and those soft droplets you can measure the deformation of the soft droplets, and by doing so you can measure the stresses that is exerted inside the tissue. So you see, you have, for instance, like an oil droplet. At first it was used by oil droplet, now they use other systems, but the first system was oil droplets. And they were able to measure the deformation, and when you get the shape of the droplet, it's very easy to get this the tension because you have a Laplace law on the droplet. So as you know the local deformation, if you know the curvature, you may know how much stress you have which are exerted on the droplet. So that's how people are doing, either like soft object embedded inside the tissue, and they measure the deformation of the object, but it's not easy, but that's how this can be implemented in vivo. Or this idea of optical tweezer, but which is very local, because the beads are 1 micrometer, so you can indeed look at the forces exerted at junction, look at the local forces exerted inside the tissue, but that's another system.
Okay, thank you. There is another question from Jonathan. Do you think rigidity might impact cancer cell migration, metastasis, and could this have therapeutic implications?
Yes, it has some impact indeed. So the first, well, of course, it has some impact, but which is still difficult to understand. But it has some impact. So there are some experiments done by the group of Valerie Weber, for instance, showing that in breast cancer epithelial cells, I think what they show is that if you move so now they use 3D systems where they change the rigidity of the I do not remember if it was collagen gel or another or matrix gel, or I do not remember, but in 3D what they observe is that as they move from soft to stiff, they completely change the organization of the cyst. And those cells on stiff, they were able clearly to invade the environment more than what they got on soft. And by doing so, they completely change the phenotype, they change the apicobasal polarity, and they are able really to send protrusion and invade the environment. So indeed, that's very important for cancer. And this idea of forces and the fact that forces are changing with the rigidity is also important, because you may understand that indeed in tumor you are changing the local rigidity of the tumor as well, and that can promote cell invasion. So there are some research in this direction. In vitro, it's also important because indeed it seems that this rigidity sensing is not the same if you look at transformed cells versus normal cells. So people indeed are also looking at that, the fact that the cancer cells are not reacting in the same way as the normal cells, and basically usually they are not really responding to the same rigidity gradient or the same rigidity, the same range of rigidities.
Thank you. So it seems there is no more question, I think.
So could be interesting for therapeutic indeed application as well. This idea of reacting or not on substrate with different stiffness.
Okay, I would like to thank you again very much, Dr. Ladoux, for this very nice talk, and thank you all for your presence at this seminar. And you can also follow us on our social networks, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also directly on Eventbrite, where you registered if you want to know about the next seminar. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. We wish you a great evening, and we hope to see you again next month for the next edition of our seminar series.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation.